Welcome to Valuations and Succession Planning for Car Dealers, where two industry experts take a deep dive into the world of dealership valuations and the strategies that can drive growth and success. In this series, Dan Iosue, a succession planner with the Rawls Group, and Scott Womack, Senior Vice President of Mercer Capital, will cover a wide range of topics, including the fundamentals of valuations, industry trends, best practices, and common challenges faced by car dealers. Here we go.
I think valuations are important because they conclude or assess value, but valuations can also be viewed sort of like how a business can be viewed. So there's different ways to view the valuation once it's conducted. At its surface, a valuation can be viewed at a point in time. So the valuation is an estimate of value as of a certain date. That can set the benchmark for what the dealership may be worth. Another view of the valuation or view of the business is it's that value relative to itself over time. So when we talk about strategic planning, right, we set goals. Dealers want to grow, and so if you've had that initial valuation to say the dealership's worth, say, X million dollars, to conduct a subsequent valuation at some period in the future will allow you to assess, did we reach those goals? How far are we along the process? Are we making progress toward those goals? A third way to view a business or evaluation is relative to peer groups, right? So you've got 20 groups out there, other competitors that provide profitability information. A lot of these dealers talk. So to the extent that they have an idea of what other dealers are worth, they can evaluate sort of the success of their business in context with peer groups. Value relative to a budget or plan, right? So a lot of dealers in the strategic planning process set goals formally through a budget or plan. So reviewing those results, both from the business performance standpoint, but also valuation against those can be important. And then another way is to look at the value with respect to a dealer's unique potential. And by that, I mean, you analyze the specific industry conditions. We're sort of coming out of maybe a heightened profitability area for dealers. So assessing, how do we do? Is everybody more profitable, more value these days? Or, how did we perform relative to the industry or our unique potential in terms of brands? Are we a Ford dealer? Are we a Porsche dealer? How do other dealers of that brand or manufacturer perform? Are we in a period where our particular manufacturer has, new and good models or products for us to sell? Or are we in a declining period? So I think that those are all different ways to kind of view your business and subsequently view the valuation.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, those are really interesting points in driving, I think, strategic growth, particularly through metrics, and we've, more and more of our clients, and I think that with the direction the industry has gone, and certainly in the past decade, and where it seems to be going is, through the lens of, metric-driven leadership and management. Of course, it's about the people and the execution, but certainly looking at from a valuation standpoint on, where we are and what we can achieve, and what we're willing to invest in resources to accomplish relative to our value. We certainly see that from a succession planning standpoint. I think most often where we see valuations as almost an absolute need from a growth standpoint is through what we would call leadership and management continuity. So it's areas of key manager retention. Are we going to, share in the upside, if you will, of the equity of driving, growth and driving performance and an increase in value? And if we're going to do that, and if we're going to do that through, more common than not, a minority stock option ownership or some sort of equity appreciation rights, then we have to know where we are today, and we have to have a very clear understanding and agreement as to our value. And we have to have, I think, all parties have a very clear expectations and agreement as to how we're going to establish the value in the future too. If we're going to set the benchmark and then look 10 years down the road and connect an incentive, particularly a retention incentive. So We can talk more about that, but if we're going to connect, the equity, the difference in equity or growth there, then we've got to be real clear and have a concrete agreement on the front end of how we're going to do that, to preclude all sorts of ugliness, on the tail end. Sorry, go ahead.
Dan, in the context of your succession planning discussions with clients, I don't know if there's an always to this question, but when in the course of those discussions is the right time to begin discussing valuations? In other words, have you already conducted a series of meetings and kind of have a plan in place? If there is a better spot for it, when do those typically occur?
Yeah, so for us, it occurs sort of midstream in where we are with in this case, in key managers or key manager retention, and pretty often what we call a succession bridge. So if we need to bridge the gap to the next generation of leadership, and we have someone in place who's got the competency, capability, and proven experience that they can step in a leadership role, particularly if something happens to the owner, and we want to make sure that we've got the proper incentives tied in to bridge that gap, right? So what I mean by that is, specifically circumstance where we've worked with clients, we've got a CFO or COO who is that person, and we want to ensure that should there be we want to ensure that they share in equity, right, and are incentivized to grow the operation, not only today but to grow it regardless of whether the owner is present, in the future for a period of time. So on the front end of that, we're going to work on what that agreement would look like. So if it's a partnership agreement, how is everybody going to get into the deal? How do we become partners? And then how do we exit our partnership should something happen? Let's agree to all that on the front end. As part of that process, we're going to talk about, how do we buy in? How are we being bought out? Okay, we're going to need to establish fair market value. How are we going to do that? We're going to lay out those terms. And at that point, once we've gotten, agreement all the way from all parties, everyone involved everyone's comfortable with what's happening, we're going to go ahead and get a valuation done. So, all of that happens, I think, it's kind of, depending on the client and the circumstance, in a fairly short order, I'd say a couple of months to come to some clarity on the relationship and what that looks like, and then move forward with the valuation from that standpoint once we're pretty concrete. So I don't know if that answered your question or not. It's it's usually once we've got everyone comfortable with the general understanding, we're going to go ahead and get the valuation done, and at the same time we're having the agreements drafted, and we're going to get ready to sit down at the table and agree to what's been discussed.
Yeah, it's always interesting for us because I think there's a misconception. Clearly, when evaluation is conducted, we work directly with the dealer or management. I would say rarely does a dealer, pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I want to call Mercer or Valuation, a professional, and have a valuation done." So we work a lot with advisors like you all, attorneys, things like that. And so, just kind of hearing more about that process and when it gets introduced becomes important to us as well.
Yeah, it's certainly a critical component to the process, and I think it's discussed almost every step of the way. It's brought up, and we're discussing, what if there's a disagreement on the valuation? What if we need sort of a tie break type circumstance? How does that work? How do we make sure that we've got confidence in in someone like yourself and who's going to perform the valuation? Yeah, so it's interested to hear your perspective on that too, because from our standpoint in the room, it's definitely something that's discussed often, early and often. And then, when, like I said, when everyone is completely, 90% comfortable with what's happening, we're going to go ahead and, pull the trigger on having it perform.
This is only one out of our 12-episode series focused on dealership valuations and the strategies that can drive growth and success. Continue listening to the series now or come back for more. Each topic featured may want you to learn something new. Succession planning allows you to create more control over the future you envision by proactively addressing possible, probable, and potential issues impacting your goals. Do you have a question you want to discuss with an expert? Feel free to reach out directly to Dan or Scott at the email addresses listed on the screen. Valuations and Succession Planning for Car Dealers is a part of the Rawls Group's Advancing Your Business, People, and Legacy Conversation series.